I've waited 100 years, and I'd wait 1,000,000 more for you. Nothing prepared me for the privilege of being yours would do. If I had only felt the warmth within your touch, if I had only seen how you smile when you blush, or how you curl your lip when you concentrate enough, I would have known what I was living for all along.
Michael A. Singer, in his book The Untethered Soul, said there's nothing more important to true growth than realizing that you are not the voice of the mind. You are the one who hears it. Welcome back to Morning Coffee. My name is Rick Alexander. You can follow me at @RickAlexander_ or at the Morning Coffee Podcast. If you want to interact with me, then that's probably the best place for you to do that. Today, I want to talk about growth. I want to offer a definition of growth today that maybe you haven't actually heard of. We tend to think of growth and we start to put all these there's all these buzzwords around it, like healing and authenticity, and you hear different people explaining their way of doing shadow work and thinking about yourself, and everybody has their own perspective that's helped work for them maybe. I wanted to break growth down. I wanted to break it into a super simple way of understanding it. And I'll get into why the quote at the beginning was important. But what I think growth really is it's just about rationally explaining to yourself that there's another way to be, and then slowly believing yourself. So one of the things that I took away from this book, The Untethered Soul, which was the quote that I mentioned at the beginning, is that your mind is always spinning up narratives. And you guys know that that's what your mind does. And I've explained that through my content quite often. One of the examples in the book that stuck out with me is if you're starting to, and I don't even know if this was the exact example, but this does it justice for sure. So if you're starting to hang out with somebody and they don't text you for a while, maybe you're in the middle of texting them, and then they just stop texting you, like let's say for an hour. Then what happens is your mind starts throwing all of these narratives up about like, well, what if maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe they don't like me. Maybe they found somebody else. And there's a million narratives. And then they text you an hour later and they say, oh, sorry about that. I was on the phone with my mom. And then instantly the narrative in your head becomes something much more supportive. Like, well, that makes perfect sense. It checks out, right? And so now all of a sudden there's no reason to question yourself. But the reality is that there actually was no reason to question yourself before either. It's just that your mind is doing what your mind does, which is spin up and add a narrative to every single thing, add judgment to something so that you can understand it. But you have to understand that your mind is conditioned to think in certain patterns. And so if it's always thought in certain patterns, and whenever it runs up against something else that it needs to understand, it's going to think and break it down with those same patterns. And it doesn't actually matter whether or not it's serving you. It's just serving its purpose, which is to add judgment to things. That's what your mind does. And so that quote that Michael Singer said, he said, there's nothing more important to true growth than realizing that you're not the voice of the mind. You're the one that hears it. And so what I think is really important to understand about that is as your mind spins up narratives, you actually have the opportunity not to listen. Right? You can look at any situation in your life and you can say, what do I think about this right now? What is my mind saying? And that's actually why I think journaling is so important, because you actually get to get it out of your mind and read it objectively and look at it. But you say, what is my mind saying about this situation that I'm in now? Now, the next question is, do you want to believe yourself? Is it actually serving you? Is it actually helping you? Maybe it is a time to do due diligence, right? Because you don't want to blindly believe people all the time. So perhaps it is. But the point is that you actually have an opportunity to vet your own thoughts. Most people take their thoughts for granted and think that they're like a product of themselves and that they're just stuck with them. Well, that's not true at all. You can believe anything that you decide to believe. You just have to rationally walk your way through it. So my definition of growth is that it's about rationally explaining to yourself that there's another way to be and then slowly believing yourself, right? And so, and if you think about all of the moments where we say we've grown, it's like, one of the big ones that I've heard in the last couple of years is, you've grown if you're in a situation that would cause you to feel some adverse type of way in the past, but you feel nothing now, right? Like something that would spin up your autonomic nervous system in the past, but now, right, as you're going through it, you've learned a new way to be, right? And that's what growth is. It's rationally explaining to yourself that there's another way to be and then believing yourself. And so whatever situation that you're looking to grow from right now, one of the ways that you can break this down, and you don't need a coach and you don't need anybody else to tell you anything, is to just sit with it for a minute and ask yourself, what do I believe about this? And why do I think that's true? Because it probably isn't. Or it might not be, right? And that's the important part. You can choose to believe something new. And if you choose to believe something new, something that serves you and the future that you have for yourself, your ideal version of yourself, if you can come up with a narrative that fits that, then you can choose to go and live your life based off of that narrative. And it doesn't matter. There's no overarching point of view, right? There's just your view from your certain point. And what happens is our mind spins up a narrative, and we think the first one that it's spun up is the one that we have to keep for the rest of our lives. And that's a ridiculous way to go through life. The reality is the first narrative that it spun up was literally nothing more than the sum total of the conditioned thought patterns and in the environment that it was in before. Right? It's just, that's why whatever you think is reasonable in this life is not a good metric for you to live your life on, because whatever you think about is reasonable is only what you've experienced thus far. And so if your parents had a really dim view of reality, then they pass it on to you, but that doesn't mean that you have to accept it. So if you want to grow, then you rationally explain to yourself there's another way to be. And then you got to slowly believe yourself, right? And that's when you pick the narrative that works for you. And the good news about reality, and I say this a lot on here, is that if you decide to live a certain way, if you actually bring your actions into alignment with your thoughts, meaning you live out the narrative that you decide, you're actually going to know right away whether it works for you, because reality's a bitch that way, and it will hit you back instantly if you're wrong, most of the time. And so, especially if you're wrong with your eyes open, right? It's when you're ignorant about being wrong that you end up going way too far in the wrong direction. But if your eyes are open, if you're truly looking for growth, if you're truly looking for truth, if you're truly looking for light in all of these situations, then you bring your actions into alignment with what you think truth, growth, and light looks like, and you find out right away if you're wrong or not. But you have to understand that you have the ability to grow. Whatever growth is to you, you have the ability for that right now. It's just choosing to follow a different narrative about whatever situation you're trying to grow out of is. Now, a lot of times we use the coaches and the mentors to help point out the other narratives, the ones that we're missing. Like I believe firmly that's actually all I do with this show is I just say to you, like, I just ask you a question, and then perhaps by you answering that question, you find out, oh, there's another way to think about this. There's another way to be. And so if you really want to grow through a situation, then that's the thing to do, is to just rationally look for the other narrative. Explain to yourself there's a new way to be, and then you got to do the hard work, which is actually believe yourself and live by it. But that's how growth occurs. It's not this really complicated thing that you have to go through. I mean, there's complicated ways to grow, and there's of course, as personal growth develops, it gets more nuanced, right? Because the problem changes, the problem gets more nuanced. You try to grow higher into a different area in your life, and then the tactical and technical knowledge that you need, of course, has to increase. But for the most part, growth is just choosing a new way to be. And your entire world is happening between your ears, and we got to stop blaming it on all the external circumstances. If you want to be different, if you want to live a different way, well, then you're the one that's stopping you from doing that. So if you want to grow, then you have to believe yourself that there's actually another way to be. And that's how that happens. So anyway, I hope this made sense for you. I hope this broke growth down in a way that's actually tangible and understandable. I said this in the past, but just because it's simple does not mean it's easy. But it's certainly not complicated. Growth is about understanding there's a new way to be, and then actually being that way. Right? It's not this complicated thing. So hopefully this makes sense for you guys, but I love you. We'll talk tomorrow on Morning Coffee.